This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au. See more of every property on the realestate.com.au app.
Welcome back. There were about 2,500 auctions held across the country on Saturday, returning a clearance rate of about 60%. Sydney held about 900 auctions with a clearance rate of 53.5%. There were a further 1,940 private sales in the state of New South Wales. Melbourne held about 1,100 auctions, returning a clearance rate of about 65%. There were a further 1,400 private sales in Victoria. Brisbane held 88 auctions with a clearance rate of about 48%. There were 1,200 private sales. Adelaide held 85 auctions with a clearance rate of about 71%. There were roughly 300 private sales. And Canberra held 72 auctions with a clearance rate of about 64%. There were a further 122 private sales in the ACT. And for more on property, I spoke to Anne Flaherty from REA Group.
Well, we're still seeing some pretty robust clearance rates. However, we have seen the clearance rate decrease slightly over the past few months. I think a lot of this has to do with the very high volume of properties being put up for auction. There has been an enormous amount of choice out there for buyers. We are still seeing very strong demand. We are seeing buy searches up compared to a year ago, but they have started to fall away a bit as we move towards the end of the year.
Are there any parts of Australia that are performing better than others?
Yeah, absolutely. If we look at where demand is up from a year ago, we're actually seeing this in most states. Most notably, we're seeing a pretty big rise in Canberra, which has seen very strong year-on-year growth. We've also seen some of the smaller capitals like Hobart record a bit of a rise. If we look at Melbourne and Sydney again, searches are up from 12 months ago. Queensland is a market and South Australia are a market where things have sort of slowed down a bit year on year. Having said that, a year ago, both of those markets were incredibly hot. They're still markets where we're seeing very, very strong buyer demand.
Yeah, and more broadly, just how are things tracking price-wise across some of those major capital cities?
Look, while we have prices sitting at record highs in every capital city bar Canberra at the moment, and I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that the impact of those 3 interest rate rises we saw earlier in the year have flowed through. We're still seeing some pretty strong levels of buyer demand. And quite interestingly, when we look and ask people what their expectations are around future price growth, overwhelmingly 4 in 5 people believe that prices will be higher in 12 months' time than they are today. And we know that when sentiment is that way, people are more likely to be willing to pay that little bit extra for a property, and that contributes to that upwards price growth.
The government's obviously got its first home buyer scheme. Are you noticing an increase now in first home buyers getting into the property market?
Yeah, look, if we look at the data, it's still only just starting to flow through. But I know from speaking to people on the ground, a variety of buyers agents, banks, what they're seeing is a massive influx of demand from first home buyers looking to buy in on that 5% deposit scheme. So we're hearing things around queues going out the door for people looking to inspect properties in those more affordable areas that are within the price caps. We're also starting to hear stories about the actual time it takes for loans to be processed slowing down somewhat because of that increase in demand as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see what this does to prices, particularly those homes that are valued within the government's actual thresholds for those markets.
Yeah, do you think we could see price increases in those sorts of affordable homes over the next 12 months due to more first home buyers being interested in bidding for properties?
I think it's inevitable. The government, of course, put a very modest prediction of what they think that the impact of the scheme is going to be on home prices. And I think that the vast majority of people analysing the market think that the impact is going to be greater than the government expect. And I think that the challenge here is that we have relatively few affordable suburbs as it is. And I think that we're going to see more of these suburbs hit those thresholds and surpass them. And again, the rate at which those home values are going to grow in those more affordable areas for those more affordable property types is probably going to exceed the rate of growth that we're going to be seeing beyond those thresholds.
Okay, and when you look at the number of properties for sale at the moment, just how are stock levels tracking right now?
Look, stock levels are very high at the moment. There's still a lot of choice out there. Of course, we are coming into Christmas. Next week is going to be the last big week for the auction market coming into Christmas. But even the week leading up to Christmas, we are seeing, some quite a lot of homes come up for sale, significantly less than we would see in the week prior. But there's still a lot of people out there looking to sell and get their homes sold off before we head into Christmas.
All right, so then we have Christmas. We've got a bit of a break. When do things start to pick back up again? When are you going to start to expect stock to come back onto the market and for auctions to really begin ramping up in 2026?
Well, we normally say it's towards the end of January, but actually, if we think about last year, things kicked off a little earlier. And I think that a lot of vendors might look at current market conditions and say, there's a lot of first home buyer demand. They might gauge that and see about selling potentially earlier. And I think that there could be some advantages to doing that. If we start to see the vast bulk of homes put up for sale, as we move sort of February to Easter, that period, which is more popular for selling, for those who can sell a little earlier, there can be the advantage of there being fewer properties on the market for sale. So depending on what your goal is, whether it's to sell at a time when there's not as many homes for sale or to wait until that actual Easter selling season kicks off, there's definitely, I think, advantages to both.
Anne Flaherty from REA Group, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.